Behind the Built Environment, the podcast from BESA, the UK's leading trade body for the building engineering services sector.
Hello, I'm David Frise, Chief Executive of BESA. Welcome to Behind the Built Environment, the podcast where I delve into the major issues facing our industry through in-depth conversations with key industry leaders. Join us as we explore the trends, challenges, and innovations shaping the future of the built environment. Today, we're exploring the digital core of our industry, the evolution of information management. Joining us is Paul Wilkinson, Vice Chair of NIMA. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you for having me.
NIMA is the UK's national body for information management in the built environment, where he also chairs the technology group. Paul is a seasoned technology consultant, writer, and former construction journalist with over 3 decades of experience helping the industry navigate digital transformation. Paul played a key role in the UK's BIM Alliance evolution into NIMA, guiding its shift from a BIM focus to a broader information management mission. Today, we'll unpack why that shift matters, from the golden thread to the TIP roadmap, and how a flatter, more inclusive organisation can lead industry-wide change. We like to kick off with some 5 short yes-no questions to kind of set the frame for this.
Okay.
It's more difficult than it looks. Do you think that most people in the industry still misunderstand what BIM actually means?
Yes.
Can digital twins be successfully adopted without first getting the basics of information management right?
No.
Is the golden thread more about culture than it is about technology?
Yes.
Do you believe the industry will hit the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Roadmap 2030 goals?
No.
Would you recommend working in digital construction to someone just starting their career?
Yes.
Well, that's a good start. You managed it. Great. We always like to set off by finding out how you ended up in the chair today. How did this career choose you? What was the path of coming into digital construction?
I think, like most people, there was no plan for me to become an information management specialist. I ended up in the space by accident. I started in the industry while I was doing a PhD in criminology and was working for a firm of consulting engineers. After a few years there, mainly in a marketing and communications role, I moved to another organisation, another multidisciplinary organisation, and it was starting its first foray into information management using a collaboration technology, a document sharing technology, to run a major project in central London. And really from that was the point at which I started to get exposed to the need to share information, to create a kind of, in inverted commas, single source of the truth. We've been talking about that for 30 years or more now, I think. In some instances, nowhere close to it, in many instances. But I've been working for the last 25 years almost expressly in that whole area of software around collaborative working, engagement, use of data, use of information to support projects and to support organisations using information through the whole life of their built and managed environment.
You've been there from the start, I think, from the UK BIM Alliance through to the transformation into NIMA. What do you think the key moments were that shaped your understanding of digital transformation? How did that experience help steer the evolution of NIMA?
I kind of trace the whole BIM movement back to around about 2010. The UK government at that time was looking at developing a low carbon approach to construction, and in developing that approach, they identified BIM as one of the big opportunities. And pushing forward with building information modelling, that was the definition of BIM at that time. We started to refine it to better information management in due course, but BIM at that time was seen by Francis Maude, Cabinet Minister, as the big opportunity to improve the industry's efficiency. But it also gave potentially the early adopters, and the UK were amongst the early adopters, leadership in the industry. So I think that was one of the key points. Another key date was 2016. We had a BIM mandate affecting the principal government departments procuring projects, and they were expected to have achieved a certain level of BIM maturity by April 2016, and projects from that date forward would continue to adopt BIM. So around about that time, the baton was handed over to industry, and UK BIM Alliance, as it then was formed to help make BIM part of business as usual across the industry. The British standards that were developed, we started with PASs and then British standards. So BS 1192 in due course became ISO 19650. So another critical date would be around the late 2018, early 2019, when the first ISO standards were published. And publication of the ISO standards has continued right through to recent times. Part 6 was published literally just a few months ago. So, I think that gives a sense of, even just over the last decade, we've moved forward with standards. In terms of NIMA, another critical date would be October 2022. That was the point at which, having debated whether BIM was the core of the industry requirement, we decided it probably isn't the only technology in town. We needed to be thinking much more broadly about information and data management as a key component for things like digital twins, the Internet of Things, robotics, smart buildings, smart cities, all of the industry buzzwords that have passed over recent times, from big data to blockchain. Information and data are absolutely core to those. So we became NIMA. It takes its name from the Greek word for thread. So the golden thread was it resonated with the movement there. But it's a name. It's not short for anything. It doesn't stand. It's just fortunate that it has IM at the heart of what we do. And that is very much our ethos. We put information management at the heart of everything that we do at NIMA. And one of our core hero statements really was that we are all information managers now. Anybody that works in any area of business and commerce and in any area of the built and managed environment, they are users of information and data. Even those people who are installing equipment, for example, they need instructions. They need information about where they're going to manage a task. And when they've completed the task, they hand over information about the completed task. So again, they're information managers in that respect. So it's about recognizing that information management is something that is intrinsic to everybody's role in the industry, from those literally at the workface right up to those around the boardroom table.
You have a very impressive, dare I say, criminologist command of key dates. Was it really only 2016, that mandate? That doesn't seem far enough ago.
Yeah, it's 9 years. I mean, we've come quite a long way in 9 years. But in terms of the mandates, we had another mandate from the TIP roadmap, the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Roadmap to 2030. It has an information management mandate. It's written into an annex of that document. And at conferences, I sometimes ask people to put their hands up. Who's read that document and who's aware of Annex B? I am lucky if I get 3 or 4 hands out of an audience of 100, maybe. And most times it's hidden away. And, that's part of the challenge.
I think you said in one of the previous questions that BIM becomes business as usual was one of the objectives of the UK BIM Alliance. Do you think we've achieved that?
Not yet.
Why do you think that is?
It's a combination of things. BIM became regarded in many circles as 3D design. It became seen as something that was focused primarily on the early stages of a project, the design, and the move into construction. Whereas a much more rounded view of information management is that it's a whole life. We should be focused on business outcomes, not just the delivery of design information or the management of a construction process. It's got to be something which creates data and information, some of which will be handed over to those who need to look after the building or other asset, whatever it is, throughout the rest of its life cycle for operation and maintenance purposes. In some instances, there will be information that needs to be made available to regulators, to the occupiers of buildings, to the users of assets, so that they can feel safe, that they can, where necessary, make interventions in their built environment. So even in the high-end residential area, we are getting to the stage where the developers want to hand over information that tenants can use to manage their apartments or to give them information about the common areas of their buildings, for example.
So moving on to that, the golden thread, which you mentioned before, and the role in building safety, how is NIMA helping to embed that concept into day-to-day project delivery and asset management?
NIMA is a voluntary-led virtual organisation. It's heavily dependent upon volunteers, and one of our key volunteer communities interfaced with the Building Safety Alliance and with a lot of the debate that went on around implementing the post-Grenfell disaster regulatory changes and legislation changes. And I think that was quite critical in embedding the idea that we needed to shift from a focus just on creating information for short-term use for information to a situation where information is now going to be used right across the life cycle and will have potential financial or even criminal penalties if people misuse the information. It's made information critical to the success of projects, but also to organizations' compliance. That has opened people's eyes to the opportunities to create better levels of information. Because I think we've reached the stage now where obviously we've got the high-rise residential buildings, which are the main focus of the golden thread type information. The argument would go, well, why would I, as a client organization, only demand a high level of information management in relation to a certain category of building? Wouldn't I want that high level of information management across all of my portfolio, all of my estate, so that I've got a consistent approach to information management, whether it's a high-rise building or not, or whether it's not a residential building, but it's a commercial building or offices or something like that. So I think it's got people thinking that there is actually a big opportunity from having good quality, trusted information that you can then reuse throughout the life cycle of an asset.
Does that not lead, though, and we hear this a lot from our members, of when the request for information is given and they say, so what information do you want? Everything is the response. And that's actually not what they want.
No.
But they haven't got the skill set to work out exactly what they do want. And therefore you get this massive data which passes, but very little information.
I think there has always been a challenge, and you rightly point out the tendency was to say, if what do you want? I want all of it. The reality is that the critical data can be distilled out from it. And we've started to see that with the golden thread. People have begun to distill what exactly was needed out of that. I think going forward, we will be able to use technology to help distill out the key information which is going to be needed in the long term, and that information which might still be necessary to keep in an archive, but doesn't form part of the operation and maintenance requirement going forward. Because certainly, there will be a lot of information which is created during the design and the construction process, some of which might just end up on the cutting room floor, or it's put into the virtual waste paper basket because it's only about the construction process. But on things like the delivery of people's fire safety, you obviously do need some visibility of the key information about what materials were installed, what company supplied them, who installed them, what processes they went through, who checked that information. That all goes to the very heart of creating trusted quality data, assured data, provenance about a particular decision. That's reassuring, I think, for those organisations who might need to insure a property, might need to manage it and ensure the safety of the occupants or tenants of that building.
Is that what the information management initiative is really about, ensuring that information is correctly collected and managed and therefore usable?
It's part of the desired outcomes of the Information Management Initiative. The IMI is a venture that was developed with the Construction Leadership Council. NIMA provides a kind of secretariat function and manages the IMI on a week-by-week basis, but we have regular interaction with the Construction Leadership Council to push it forward. The intention really is to create an organisation-level mandate that helps individual companies, whether they're clients, whether they're contractors, consultants, whether they're suppliers, facilities managers, or a whole host of different types of organisation, to create a mandate that helps them improve information management to suit their business outcomes. It's not just about creating the right outcomes for built assets, it's about the right outcomes for businesses. So it's business outcomes as well as built asset outcomes here. Because I think, going back to some of the reasons why BIM never got fully accepted, it wasn't just we got focused on the design side of things. There was also a sense that in some instances, IT was a bit of an overhead. We didn't invest heavily enough in it in the way that other industries do. We also have a fragmented industry. We're often working on projects on a relatively short-term basis. A team comes together, collaborates, and at the end of the project, it's dispersed. And sometimes the information that they created is dispersed with them. It's about getting over that process, keeping that body of information together in a form that can be used by the asset owner or operator and move it forward. So those are some of the reasons that we wanted the Information Management Initiative to become embedded. It provides good information, good quality data and information, provides value. It adds value to an asset in the same way that the service history of a car adds value to the second-hand value of a car. If you've got good information about your built asset, it saves time on, you don't need to resurvey things or do investigations if you've got detailed as-built records. So there is a big commercial opportunity that comes from better information management.
Providing you're looking at the whole life cost, and you are so. In many cases, the person who constructed it has no share in the future of that building because they've sold it or moved on. It's that bit that needs the tying in, isn't it?
I think it does need tying in. I think there is a recognition through things like the golden thread that there can be liabilities that will come back and bite you down the line if you haven't complied with the relevant regulations and so forth. And we've seen recent court cases where people have identified that they can still be liable, decades after an unfortunate decision that was made by their organisation in the past. So I think it is about that, but it's also, I think, recognising it's not just about commercial buildings, it's about housing, it's about airport buildings, railways, all sorts of assets, many of which have a service life measured not just in decades, but in some cases centuries. And it's about making sure that we have accurate information about those assets that will give people confidence when it comes to making appropriate improvements to those assets over time. Maybe at some point, those assets might need to be demolished. It's about giving people then information about how that building was constructed, what it was made of, so that they can recycle or potentially repurpose things at the end of life. So it goes right to the heart of circular economy thinking. It also provides information they can use when it comes to things like energy efficiency. So when you're delivering a commercial building, for example, a developer could potentially be looking at, what are the credentials, what are the information management opportunities that come from me being able to show this has a certain level of energy efficiency, which will make it more marketable than one which is built several years ago when when energy efficiency wasn't as important as a differentiator for property.
You chair the NIMA's technology group, and there are lots of emerging tech coming through. You've mentioned plenty, but AI, digital twins, Internet of Things. Which excites you most about that? And secondly, do we have the right skills in the industry to really fully take advantage of them?
I think things like artificial intelligence, it's the big buzzword. If I think back to Digital Construction Week trade show we went to a couple of weeks ago, AI was one of the dominant themes around the different stages at that event. Quite a number of vendors talking about the capabilities of their technology to deliver to support artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I'm excited about that. But there will be other buzzwords along in the future. The fundamentals, whether we're talking about blockchain, artificial intelligence, digital twins, robotics, the fundamentals are all about having good quality, trusted data. Because if you put rubbish in, you're going to get rubbish out. That's the kind of principle behind the efficient use of information for artificial intelligence. It needs to be trained on good quality data to get good quality outputs from artificial intelligence. So I'm excited about that.
How do people get involved with NIMA? You've flattened the structure. You've shifted from a traditional board to a facilitation team. Is that in order to encourage more participation from the industry?
Absolutely. We are, as I said earlier, heavily dependent upon volunteers. We have a core group of vice chairs, each of whom take on a particular responsibility. We've just been recruiting some new vice chairs very recently. But around those vice chairs, we want to build a kind of constellation of volunteers who can support activity. And that can be long-term support. We've been very fortunate in having individuals, some of whom are involved with, for example, Building Smart International or British Standards Institution or the International Standards Organisation, so that their work helps create some of the standards, helps create some of the guidance. But we're also, dependent upon people putting time into developing case studies, creating thought papers, white papers that will help industry move forward. But it's also, volunteers can help at trade shows. Our presence at Digital Construction Week required quite a number of volunteers to turn up in East London and support us over the 2 days. But I think in terms of helping industry move forward, we offer a number of ways in which people can get involved. They can get involved as ambassadors, with helping spread the information management message, evangelize information management. We have networks. Some of them date back to the BIM days, and there were networks, for example, like BIM for Water, BIM for Rail. Those were special interest groups where people came together because they worked in a particular field of engineering or building or surveying or what have you. But also some regional groups as well. A number of ways in which people can get involved might help them in their career. It helps them, they might specialise in a certain area of civil engineering and therefore want to specialise in information management in that field of engineering. So BIM for Water might be one if you were working in the water industry, for example. That's one area of volunteering. But at a very practical level, as a voluntary-led organisation, we have to keep activities rolling forward. We need to keep a website active. We need to be thinking about our communications. Podcasts is something that NIMA has done in the past. I would love to get podcasts going again at NIMA. And that's an area where, again, we might seek help from volunteers to support that. Same with video. Again, creating good video content about information management might be something that somebody would be interested in volunteering to do.
We've heard a lot of jargon, and there is a lot of jargon in this, and there's always a fear, I think, when you go into a room to discuss these matters, that you're the only person who doesn't understand what they're all talking about when they're using a lot of jargon. How do you overcome that? Do you need to be an expert to engage with NIMA?
NIMA is a very broad church. We recently started a membership process. People can now become a member of NIMA at a bargain rate of £35. It's certainly not the level of professional subscription paid by some of the more established organisations. And the reason for keeping it at a low price was to help people make that early step, that early investment, but also because we recognise some people at a very early stage, they might not know what they want, how they want to get involved with NIMA. So we as a group, we're trying to cater for those who are maybe at the very beginning of their information management journey. They may have suddenly just been nominated to take on a task or a role, and they want some support. They want somewhere where they can go and ask questions. There'll be others who are mature. They've been perhaps information managers, document controllers, BIM managers for several years, and we want to cater for them as well. So it's a very broad church. But in terms of jargon, what we've been trying to do is take where possible, a plain language approach. Even within the BIM standards world, we talk about plain language questions. There's an irony there that we actually needed to talk about plain language questions because obviously there might have previously been some ones which were technical language questions, and that would have been off-putting. But yeah, by having plain language questions and using simpler English, I think we can help get sometimes quite complicated concepts well understood, help people make their first steps.
Let's talk a bit about measuring success. 2030 and beyond. 2030 will be here before we know it, I'm sure. And you've spoken about aligning success with the TIP roadmap, which we've also said nobody's read. What are tangible indicators that show NIMA's mission has succeeded by then?
We will be heading in the right direction if we reach a point where, for example, those people taking on responsibility for operation and maintenance and facilities management get the information they need to manage those assets going forward. That's been one of the headaches that we've had over the past decade from the BIM world, is that there wasn't confidence in the asset operators that they would get the right information they needed. So I think that would be one big tick in the box from my point of view. I think another area that I would like to see progress would be around the whole area of interoperability. Interoperability here means the ability of systems to exchange and use information independent of the technology. So you don't need the native software in order to utilize the data or information. That has been a big handicap. If you look at other industry sectors, they've overcome their interoperability issues. Systems talk to each other in a very seamless way, and information flows almost at the blink of an eye between systems, even on different continents. We don't have that in the built environment at the moment, partly because of the fragmentation of the industry. We were creating technologies in silos, and sometimes the nature of our industry was, we tried to keep in the silos, and we didn't necessarily want the silos to connect. But I think that there's a recognition now going forward that we need to connect the silos, not necessarily break the silos down, but connect them. And connecting those silos requires open information to flow freely between them without there being any reduction in the quality of that data. So if we can make progress in that respect, that would be a huge bonus for me. That's something I've been working towards for the past 20 years.
And is that part of the reason that there isn't this connection between what's built through into how you manage the assets?
Very much so. I think it's been a long-standing challenge. There was a piece of research more than 20 years ago now that identified what the cost to owner-operators was of poor interoperability. And it was just focused on the United States. And they identified a total cost for this facilities industry of $15 billion per annum. So that's a huge cost borne by organizations running property as a consequence of poor abilities to share information. We've come on a long way since then, but we still face major challenges in that respect. The analogy I like to use is look at the opportunity that we have if we were as open as the World Wide Web. Our ability to share websites, to share website data, to send emails to one another. A lot of that comes from open standards, open protocols that are globally understood and globally applied by vendors. We need to be moving much more in that direction, which is where organizations like Building Smart are helping us go with some of their discussions around things like industry foundation classes and other bits of jargon we could talk about as well.
So the barriers to a widespread effective adoption, not just adoption in name, is this cultural, is it technical, or is it financial, or is it a lack of skills? What is it that's preventing?
It's been a combination of things. I think certainly it was financial. There was a time when IT was seen as an overhead and it needed to be managed and, if possible, minimized. So we didn't necessarily invest heavily in IT in the way that other industries did. Certainly cultural. I've talked a little bit about the silos. We had, for example, architectural solutions developed for architects, but the outputs from those didn't necessarily talk to the solutions that were developed for structural engineers, which didn't talk to the solutions which were developed for building services engineers, which didn't then talk to the solutions that were needed by facilities managers. So it's about overcoming some of those information flows. So certainly there. And technology is probably almost the easier thing to resolve. Successful collaboration, the old saying is, it's kind of 80% people and process and 20% technology. I would argue it's probably even 90% people and process and only 10% technology. That's the major opportunity. And which is why going forward, the Information Management Initiative is a change program where we're looking towards 2030. It's 5 years, partly because the big change management within organizations is about people and process, and that's the thing that's time consuming. Simple adoption of technology is often quite quick. We saw through COVID how quickly people adapted through using Zoom and Teams and things like that to overcome the fact that they needed to work from home. Suddenly we all became very capable communicators or users of technology. We don't need another pandemic to drive that change, but there is a bigger opportunity to move us forward, and that's what the IMI is seeking to do, is to provide another level of impetus to take us forward.
Isn't the irony, though it's culturally driven, people driven, that inevitably we end up saying, as soon as we get this new system, new software package, it'll all be fine, and then they just import the bad practice into the new system and they've made no progress?
That can happen, but I think where we've seen some major opportunities comes from sometimes the simplest thing. Mobile communications have made a huge difference over the past 20 years. So if we talk about what's changed in the industry, if we go back 20 years, we didn't have mobile phones, smartphones. We had voice. We could exchange voice conversations, but we couldn't necessarily send data and rich media, videos and photographs and other content in the way that we can today. So we've moved forward with that. And one of the big opportunities, I think, comes from looking at opportunities to use mobile technology, new apps, to simplify a process. I said earlier, we can all be information managers now, but we don't necessarily need to have a detailed knowledge of ISO 19650 or other standards if the technology does it for us. Most people when they pick up a smartphone don't need instruction in using it. They don't need to be trained. If we have apps that will help facilitate a process simply, that will help us move forward.
Yeah, as an industry, we still insist we need to educate the client. Why? Shouldn't it be so simple?
It should be
need
simple
to educate the client. Well, thank you for that. Now I'm going to try and summarize what we've just been through. And you're going to have to correct me if I haven't quite got this right. So NIMA was formed some long time ago as the UK BIM Alliance and has transformed into NIMA. And that has shifted it from BIM, building information modeling, to, I think you described it as better information modeling.
Better information management.
Better information management. Thank you. The Golden Thread and the Building Safety Act provide a fantastic opportunity for this to become genuinely embedded in all projects, not just high-rise, high-risk buildings.
I think it's an example of how good information management addresses one challenge. If we can get it to address other challenges, whether that's energy efficiency, circular economy thinking, recycling, better carbon performance. There are lots of opportunities, and probably the carbon one is probably the next big opportunity.
You flatten the structure so you get more participation. You're looking for people to volunteer and participate as part of their career progression.
Yes.
You will learn something if you engage with NIMA, and you don't have to be an expert.
No.
Just find your group.
We cater for everyone from the very early beginner through to those who regard themselves maybe as experts in a particular field, but want to give something back to the industry.
And as part of that, success will look like by 2030 is that we've cracked that bridge from construction completion to management of the built asset. The information flows seamlessly between the two. And it does that because systems talk to each other seamlessly and in a connected industry.
Interoperability is fundamental to that outcome from my point of view.
Great. So final question. Does that make you an optimist at the end of this, or are you a pessimist about the future?
I'm an optimist. I think when I look back over the past 25 years at the distance we've travelled and the range of technologies we've encompassed into our daily working, and the pace of technology change isn't slowing down. I think there's a big opportunity as new technology comes in, as more computational power is thrown at some of the challenges. I think we'll make advances. We'll accelerate in making those changes.
Paul Wilkinson, Vice Chair of NIMA, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And now on to the podcast news. The latest annual BESA Top 30 M&E Contractor Report is out now. It's always great insight into the state of the market and also part peek over the fence to see who the biggest movers and shakers are. Visit thebesa.com to download your free copy now. The new BESA demonstrating SCEB for industrial and commercial ductwork installers is now available and is designed to help industrial and commercial ductwork installers and employers in demonstrating competence with regulatory and industry standards. Endorsed by John Van Stone, Chair of the Industry Competence Committee, who said, "The SCEB toolkit is a clear and practical example of what good looks like when sector-led initiatives meet the ambitions of national policy. It provides an essential foundation for ensuring individual competence can be properly demonstrated and supported, both now and in the future." So whether you're a contractor, client or compliance professional, it's time to turn your experience into evidence. Download your free copy via our BESA Knowledge portal. And don't forget, entries for BESA Industry Awards taking place on the 16th of October at the Brewery London close next week on the 4th of July. If you've done great work, now's the time to shout about it. Enter now and get the recognition you and your team deserve. Visit thebesa.com to enter for free now. Thank you for tuning in to Behind the Built Environment. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more in-depth conversations with industry leaders. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and share with your colleagues. Stay connected with BESA for the latest updates and insight into our industry. And until next time, I'm David Frise, and this has been Behind the Built Environment. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Built Environment podcast from BESA. If you like what you heard today, then please follow and rate us on your favourite podcast app. Come and join us over on LinkedIn, BESA Group, and carry on the conversation. And if you want to find out more about joining the BESA community, then please visit thebesa.com to start your journey with us today.